guys, we've still got a couple of minutes, so we'll get started in about 2. Hopefully, folks, you can hear us online. I feel like I'm shouting. This is my presenting voice. I'm so sorry if I'm deafening people on the other side of their laptops. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think a few more folks will come online and into the room. So we might even give it a couple of minutes after that, just so it's not too disruptive for everybody today. All right. Hi guys, for the benefit of everybody online, we'll get started in a couple of minutes.
A lot of travel next week. So next week
Can I stand here now? Is that all right? Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you very much. All right, guys, it's 2 minutes past, and I'm surrounded by people who are keen to stick to time, so I feel the pressure. So I'm going to get started. My name is Ros Williams, and it is a pleasure to see you all here today. Today we're going to have a fantastic public keynote lecture from an old colleague of ours, Dr. Łukasz Szulc, and Isabel Higgins, our chair, is sat over there. She'll be taking the reins for that. In the meantime, though, what I'd like to do is give you a bit of information about the initiative in which this keynote lecture is sort of nested, the Digital Good Network. And the Digital Good Network is an ESRC funded initiative. And we're involved in actually doing a great deal of stuff, which I would just very briefly like to tell you about. Before I do that, I wanted to give you an FYI that this event is being recorded. Folks online, hello, good to see you. Hopefully you can see me through the, as Dee calls it, the dystopian device of the owl. Thank you for joining us. It'll be recorded, it'll put on our website as well. So if this is a super informative lecture for you, which I'm sure it will be, don't feel the need to write down frantic notes, because it'll all be online for you to revisit later. So just sit in and enjoy. Live captions are provided for this event as part of the accessibility initiative that we're trying to foster in all of the events we undertake as a Digital Good Network, because we believe that an accessible and diverse research environment is important for all of us to thrive and for our research to be really good. We are going to be taking some photographs of the event. We've got Law, our fantastic photographer, who'll be here to take some photographs. Please do contact a member of our team, ideally Dee or Ruth, if you've got any concerns about that after the fact. And I also just wanted to mention, in the spirit of solidarity, something that's happening in the university sector at the moment. Folks who were on the internship call will have already heard me give this patter, but I think it's important to repeat it again for those who weren't able to hear it at the time. The members of the Digital Good Network management team, we want to acknowledge the current marking and assessment boycott, which is part of a very long-term, very ongoing industrial action over pay, working conditions and pensions in our sector. It's a very serious thing that we're all focusing on and taking a lot of our emotional energy to think about all the time. So it's in our minds as we speak. So because of the nature of the current marking and assessment boycott affecting certain staff, those who obviously are marking and assessing and others not at all, and the diverse severity of the punitive pay deductions that are taking place across the sector, we have actually elected to move ahead with this event and the summer school that it is a part of. I just want to quickly acknowledge this university's position, which is to adopt 100% of the pay of people who are undertaking the marking and assessment boycott, even though the marking and assessment is not 100% of their workload. So that effectively locks them out of their jobs, and I think that's important to acknowledge. That's the University of Sheffield doing that. And on behalf of this event's organisers, I want to send solidarity to those people who are locked out currently, to all of our current colleagues across the sector as we continue this really, really important fight. So I've eaten into significant amounts of my minutes there, but it's worth doing, I think. So a quick self-description for those online. I said my name's Ros Williams. I'm an associate director of the research network, but that doesn't tell you what I look like. I've got brown hair. If you can't see me, I'm wearing this like gingham shirt, which I think is quite stylish. Thank you for all agreeing. and I've got like kind of like a mixed race. I've got sort of brownish skin. So it's lovely to meet you all, and I hope you can all see me or imagine me with your mind's eye. So I think that kind of covers the things I wanted to say. I want to tell you a little bit about the research network. Conscious again of time, let me just check, I've got a bit. So the ESRC Digital Good Network, the purpose of what we're doing is to build a research community. That's the main thrust of what we're trying to get at here. And we're trying to focus on what a good digital society looks like. What does it actually look like? Obviously, we can't decide. We all have to work through to that definition together. Also, we're trying to do some of the work of arriving at that good digital society insofar as you ever really get there. But we're trying to enable some of the work that can do that. Part of what we're doing then to enable that kind of activity is to bring disciplines together. So in the room today, we've got a fantastic set of PhD students from across disciplines who are coming together for our summer school, that I'll speak a little bit more about. But we're also trying to engage different sectors. So folks who are involved in this network currently include Zinc VC, which is an organisation that works with startups to use social science research in their product development, and BBC R&D. Just a couple of examples of the organisations that we work with, because again, we believe that we need to be cross-sectoral in trying to make this happen. We're trying, through the investment from the ESRC of about £4 million, distribute a ton of that money to you guys, to other people, to undertake research, to get involved in fellowships, to get involved in internships. And even so, for example, this summer school that's taking place today, it's a shorter summer school this year, but in future years, it'll hopefully be even longer. And all of the money that we've gotten from the ESRC, we're sort of ploughing into those kinds of initiatives. We're providing training, hosting various events that you can learn more about by joining our social medias. Dee, I mentioned it. Please join our email address as well, so that our mailing list as well, so you can engage with DGN more long term. So there are various things that we're engaging in, and a lot of these are sort of draped around three core arms. The first of them is equity, right? So a big focus for us is on how we make sure digital societies work for the diverse society that we are, right? So technology doesn't work the same for everybody, and depending on your social location, you'll engage with the same technology in very different ways. So how do we figure that into anything from theorizing through to design? Sustainability, thinking about climate change, but other issues as well there, in making the digital future more sustainable, acknowledging the material reality of internet pipes that run under the ocean, destroying or at least disrupting specific biodiverse communities of life under the sea. All of these different things have to factor in to how we're thinking about digital technologies and how we enable that good digital future. and resilience as well. It's a particular word that we're using, and it kind of figures into other words that we might use as well, things like well-being. And we're focusing there on how the digital world is kind of shaped to ensure that digital technologies can enhance well-being in a specific set of ways that aren't too prescriptive. We're interested in unpacking some of these ideas. And a lot of the work that we're trying to engage and to foster through the Digital Good Network engages with these three key areas, either one or more of them. So each year we have the Digital Good Research Fund. I'm just going to give a really quick shout out of these. I promise it's super quick, but it's very relevant for people in the room. This Digital Good Research Fund, we fund between £20,000 and £50,000 for a project, a discrete project that you would design, and we will fund that work. It's a competitive process, of course. This year's focus was the foundations of the digital good. We've actually closed that process, and hopefully in the next week or two, we'll be notifying the successful applicants for that fund. The focus is on interdisciplinarity, but also capacity building. So we're really keen for early career researchers to get involved. So PhDs online and PhDs in the room. If you're like in your second or third year and you're thinking, what am I going to do next? Which you probably all are, because it plagues our minds all the time. Maybe this is for you. In the next couple of years, it'll be a good opportunity. We've also got the research internships. I won't go through all of this in too much detail now, but if you want more information, these internships have just launched. The information is now online, and this morning's webinar that I also presented will be online very, very soon. And there's loads of information there from prospective organisations and other people who've gone through internships. And finally, our Digital Good Network Summer School. So we've got a bunch of people here. Can you put your hands up if you're in the summer school, guys? Is that all right? Look at that. That's lovely. So we've got a 2-day summer school where folks are coming together across a range of different disciplines to talk about the digital good. We're going to be doing that all together. About 25 of us students here today, representing, as I say, all kinds of different disciplines. If you are now in your first year of study and that sounds good to you, then apply for next year. It's second and third year, basically, our PhD students that we've got here now. Anyway, so I think that's the bulk of what I wanted to talk about today. I want to say, again, a very hearty thank you to all of you for being here. I want to say as well a massive thank you to our organisers. So Daniel, who does all of our technology and enabled this beautiful owl-looking thing, Dee, who does all of our media and comms, and Ruth, who has organised the entire shebang. I'm now going to pass over to Isabel Higgins. So thank you, guys.
Hi everyone, it's so lovely to be here, to everyone in the room, and I think we've got about 50 people online. So everyone online, I think I'm looking directly at you if I look at this thing. Hi, welcome. My name is Isabel. I use she, her pronouns, and for people, in terms of the visual description for people online, I'm wearing a new shirt that I bought because I got a new job, so this is the shirt. It's black with blue and green flowers on it, and I'm wearing black otherwise clothes, and I have brown hair, brown eyes, and I'm mixed race but look pretty white to most people. So that's who I am. Really excited to be here today and to introduce Łukasz for our talk. So just a little bit about him before we begin. So Łukasz Szulc is a senior lecturer in digital media and culture at the University of Manchester, specialising in critical and cultural studies of digital media at the intersections of gender, sexuality and transnationalism. The main focus of his work is Central and Eastern Europe, especially Poland. Łukasz sat on the board of directors and was a co-chair of ICA's LGBTQ Studies Interest Group between 2017 and 2021. His publications received multiple awards, for example, by the Association for Slavic, Eastern Europe and Eurasian Studies, British Association for Slavonic and East European Studies, and International Communication Association. Łukasz has been invited to give multiple keynotes and talks, for example, at the University of British Columbia in Canada, University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, University of Siegen in Germany, I hope I'm saying that correctly, the University of Warsaw in Poland, the European University Institute in Italy, and UCL, LSE, and University of Sussex in the UK. He is a member of editorial boards at the International Journal of Cultural Studies, International Journal of Communication, and Communication, Culture and Critique. And today, Łukasz is going to be talking to us about feminist and queer manifestos for digital utopias. Really, really excited to hear this talk, and especially the question, one of the questions that he poses, which is how we can turn our research into manifestos for better digital futures. So join me in giving Łukasz a warm welcome.
Hi everyone. It's okay? Yep. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this talk, and thank you very much to the Digital Good Network for inviting me. It's really great to be back to Sheffield, and it's an honor to deliver this talk. So before I start, I also would like to give a very brief description of myself. I'm a white, bald man in his middle 30s, wearing silver glasses and silver earrings. And I'm also wearing a black shirt and what I would like to believe is a fabulous shirt that could be mistaken by a curtain if you visited some Polish town in the 1990s. I think that the theme today is a fabulous shirt, definitely. Also, before I start, I would like to acknowledge that the UCU strike, and I fully support the strike, and I believe that our leaders can do better. So. So now, to my talk, Feminist and Queer Manifestos for Digital Futures. When I was invited to give that talk, the one kind of observations that I had was that academics in humanities and social sciences, so us basically, very often we are doing the catch-up play when faced with the critique of digital technology. And we don't have many visions for better digital futures. We're focusing on more on critique, and the critique often is belated and reactive. Now, there is some good reasons for that. The pace of the technological change is very rapid. We don't have access to a lot of big tech data because they block it from us. And also a lot of kind of the black box nature of a lot of algorithms and other kind of technologies also prevents us to get to know more about it. But I still do believe that we need, that the critique alone is not enough, and we have to think about the better digital futures ourselves, but also maybe we can see what other people, what kind of other digital futures other people imagine. So where shall we look for visions for better digital futures? We have many different options. Some researchers are looking into the industry itself. So, you know, there's a lot of trends published by the industry. What will be the next big tech thing next year? Also, some of the researchers are analyzing the rhetoric of the industry, what the industry kind of presents itself, what kind of communicative strategies they use to tell us about what the future of the digital world should look like. And here's a very recent example from Naomi Klein and her team when she was criticizing those industry visions, specifically talking about the makers of artificial intelligence, saying that what they imagine the world with the artificial intelligence will look like is basically hallucinations. It's quite often, it could be very informed visions because they are invested in it, they are actually making those technologies. However, it could be to some extent dishonest because they want to take care about their own business, take care about them getting the policies they want to get, and sometimes just overly optimistic. On the other spectrum of where we can find the visions for digital futures is ordinary people. And this is one project by Sarah Ping and her team about imagining digital energy futures, where she actually asked both the industry, what do you think will be the digital energy futures, as well as ordinary people. How do you use the energy, and what kind of devices do you use for the digital energy, and what do you think you would like to have in the future, and then kind of comparing those different visions. Here, I think we have much more honest visions. However, quite often they could be uninformed visions. I'm not saying always. We sometimes could be surprised what the ordinary people actually can tell us about the future and the future they want. However, very often people, when we do interviews or focus groups, they just didn't think about those things and don't have much thing to say unless they kind of spend more time on thinking about it. So then I was thinking about manifestos. So there is also something between industry and ordinary people. And manifestos are created neither by the industry nor by ordinary people. They're created by extraordinary people, engaged actors. So I'm thinking here about artists, activists, and also academics, sometimes academics who are activists or academics who are artists. Those are the people who, care about those stuff. They think about those stuff a lot. They read on that topic, they do research on that topic, and they discuss those topics as well between each other. So why not looking for some inspirations for those better digital futures in this kind of forms of publications or just outputs, whatever we call them. Before going for the manifestos themselves, I also want to acknowledge other creative and engaged, invested visions for better digital future. One of them are, of course, sci-fi literature. And in sci-fi literature, we have a lot of dystopian works saying how horrible it will be in the future. However, we also have some utopian works. And those that I present here are all utopian visions of the future. And they are all also dealing with the questions of gender and sexuality. Imagining, for example, a third gender or gender shaping or creatures without gender and so on. So there is something like that. And also I want to acknowledge this and some other forms that I'll talk about in a second, because they could also be thought as manifestos. I think it all depends how we define manifestos. And I'll talk about it in a second. And I use this kind of more expansive definition of manifestos, where I think some of those things that I'm mentioning right now could be considered as manifestos potentially as well. Another thing is poems. There are some selections that I found of wonderful poems about technology, gender, and sexuality. The beautiful collection Soft Science by Franny Choi, that she's working with issues of AI, cyborgs, gender, sexuality. And I'll give one example of her work later on as well. And another project by Spam Press, Brilliant Vibrating Interface, queering the post-internet through poetry and practice. Another last example is just art, other kind of artistic projects. One artist I want to mention is Zach Blas, who has a series of works that is called Queer Technologies. And one of these queer technologies is Transcoder, which is a queer programming anti-language. And the other one is a singer and video artist, Arka, who is presenting a lot of writing a lot of songs and creating video clips, thinking about how to dismantle gender and sexuality through and with digital technologies. And this is video, and this is like a screenshot from one of her video and song that is called Non-Binary. So now back to manifestos. As I said, what could be defined as manifesto is not so obvious. And here I'm building mostly on the work of Galina Janoszewski, who's writing a article about writing manifestos, or writing about manifestos, actually, about the kind of manifesto studies, let's say. And she was saying, it's not very always clear what is manifesto. A lot of people, when they study manifestos, they also include text that do not have the manifesto in title, but kind of feel like manifestos. And she's that's why talking about fuzzy borderlines of the genre, let's say. And she kind of includes in manifestos the text that she would call a sort of manifesto or manifestory texts. And here I'll kind of understand it in similar way. And we can also think about kind of genres that could be considered manifestos or are very close to manifestos, like call for action, petition, declaration, pamphlet, or even a flyer or open letter that is distributed online. So keep that in mind, this kind of more expansive definition of manifestos when I will be talking about feminist and queer manifestos. Some kind of key characteristics of manifestos, what they are about, most of the time is not about the content. Content is, of course, very important, but I think what's distinctive of manifestos is their form, style, and affect. So very often they are programmatic and prescriptive. So they propose some kind of program for the future. They prescribe something, what the world should look like, what better world should look like. Very often they communicate principles or doctrine. So they are very much about the foundational or the foundations of the new world. So some people could be disappointed with manifestos that they don't give you a very immediate practical advice, do this and then do that, because they are about reimagining the world altogether at the very kind of basic, what would be the principles of the new world? And then we have to figure out the details of that vision. They question the system, the status quo. Of course, very often they come from the position that now and here is not enough, and we need something better. That's why they impose the new future. Quite important as well. I think it's also very close to feminist and queer work, inventing new language, recognizing that the language that we have right now is limiting and kind of prevents us to talk about, let it be gender, sexuality, race, whatever, in a new way, in a less limiting way, and kind of imagining new social relations. That's why very often they're being creative in a way that they propose new language. And I think it's also very interesting to notice that there is quite a close relationship between manifesto and theater. So they're very performative. They're very often designed as being performed and even screamed in front of audiences in public places and so on. There's a very long history of manifestos, and I'm not going into that, but just to signal that, you know, we have a lot of artistic manifestos in the history, presenting new visions for art, like Futurist Manifesto at the very beginning of the 20th century, literary manifestos suggesting for new ways of literature, as well as political manifestos. And here I would also include social manifestos or counterculture manifestos, including feminist and queer manifestos. Communist Manifesto is probably another famous example here. There's also a very long history of writing manifestos by feminists and queers, not related to digital technology. So here I also give you some examples from 1967, the very famous Valerie Solana's Scam Manifesto, Society for Cutting Up Men. Another one from 1990, Queers Read This, or Dyke Manifesto from 1992. We could see that this kind of genre is very attractive to feminists, to queers, to people who are at the margins, probably because of the features that I just described, that they challenge the status quo and kind of radically require a new, better world when they don't being just assimilated, but rather the recreation of the world when they are treated as equals. The one thing before I actually go to tell you something about the queer and feminist manifestos for digital futures is also I want to discuss the word utopia that I put in my title. I put it very consciously there. And manifestos are good at dreaming utopias because of all the reasons that I told you already. And utopia is the word coming from those two Greek words that kind of sounds the same. That's why it's a kind of interesting play between them. One word is a good place, the other one is no place, nowhere. So in a way, utopia is a kind of perfect place that actually doesn't exist. Because of that, a lot of people also criticize utopia because it's this kind of naive, not practical, irrational almost imaginations of the future. So they prefer to focus on the immediate and kind of practical measures rather than reimagining the entire system. But I'll build on the work of Jose Esteban Munoz in his book, Cruising Utopia, the then and there of the queer futurity, to convince you otherwise. So he, in his work, he's very much invested in utopia, and he's building on the work of the philosopher Ernst Bloch, who proposed kind of two forms of utopia, abstract utopia and concrete utopia. And he said abstract utopia could be this kind of a little bit more naive utopia. There's also a place for it, but he said it's a little bit more this kind of naive, just thinking in abstract, while concrete utopia is historically situated struggles, is about educated hope, is risked disappointment. So here in that kind of thinking, utopia itself is not the end goal, it's the process going to it. Okay, we imagine this perfect place that probably doesn't exist and will never reach there, but what else are we supposed to do? We can strive for it, and we will fail. We will be disappointed with not reaching the utopia, but in the process, maybe we change a little bit. Then we fail, and then we change, we start again, then we change something for maybe for the better a little bit again. And here you can again see how it's that attractive for a lot of marginalized communities who very often are not in the position of power. So it's not up to us to change the system, because very often we don't have the power to change the system. But maybe we can kind of strive for the utopia, at least imagine what would be the world we would like to live in, and then trying this kind of, through try and failure, trying to at least change a little bit. And the last thing here I want to say is this kind of relationship between dystopia and utopia. Very often they are kind of presented as something opposite. But of course, there's very dialectical relationship between them. If you imagine dystopia, the worst possible place, by definition, you tells us what utopia would be, the opposite. And the same with the utopia. If you imagine the utopia, it kind of tells us what dystopia would be, the opposite of that. However, I think it's still more useful, and I want to argue, to be invested more in utopia than dystopia, because dystopias, I think, are a little bit more, or they're a little bit more suggesting that we can kind of stay with the status quo, in a sense that we have a status quo, it's not good, there's some kind of crisis, it doesn't work very well. Well, we have a dystopia, it could be even worse. So, so be happy basically with what you have, even if it's not great. Utopia requires some kind of other, it requires work basically. It's like, it's not great now, it could be much better. There's some alternatives there that we can strive for, but then that's require work, that we have to work for those kind of visions to happen. That's why I kind of more invested following Jose Esteban Munoz, more invested in utopias than dystopias, even though I see the connections between them. And now, finally, to the feminist and queer manifestos about digital technologies. I want to make a little bit of a disclaimer here that it's not actually part of my research. And I started looking into that because I was invited to give that keynote. So I wanted to be specifically, I wanted that my talk specifically relates to what this network is about, and is about trying to imagine better and good digital future. So I was thinking at the very beginning, I presented to you, where could I find the visions of better future? And being myself feminist and queer media scholar, I was immediately thinking about feminist and queer manifestos. So, you know, I'm not coming from nowhere. As I said, I am a feminist and queer media scholar. I'm engaging with those discussions for the last 10 or more years. However, what I'm offering you today is not like a result of some kind of robust and long-term analysis. It's rather what me reading those different manifestos, what I found interesting and inspiring, and what I hope we can take as an inspirations for creating better digital futures. So first observation when I was looking for those feminist and queer manifestos is that there's many of them. You would be surprised. I found about 30 or 40 manifestos, and probably there's even more than that. I just did like kind of regular search myself. So there are a lot of people, artists, academics, activists invested in rethinking the digital future. It's out there. The two earliest one that I found is 1985, the Cyber Manifesto by Donna Haraway, and then the Cyber Feminist Manifesto from 1991. I'm pretty sure you can find some earlier one as well, especially if you use this kind of more expansive definition of manifesto that I'm using. But those are the earliest one that I found. And then there's plenty of them since 2015. So we also see that there is some kind of momentum there, that a lot of people see that there is now a need for those manifestos, that maybe there's some kind of feeling of crisis, feeling of, you know, things are not going well. I think those two early manifestos are also good to discuss very briefly, to realize the diversity of different kind of manifestos. So Donna Haraway Manifesto was first published in an academic book. It has a lot of footnotes, academic references. It feels like an academic article. albeit very much not traditional academic article. It's very creative. It challenges a lot of kind of forms of expectations of academic writing. The other, the Feminist Manifesto, this is it. This is the full manifesto. So also the Donna Haraway manifesto is long. We have to spend some time to get through it. This is the entire manifesto. In that form, it was published originally on the online, and then also on big billboards that were traveling through streets. So we can see it could be different in form, different in length, differently distributed. And also they could be written either by one person or by a collective. And quite often those manifestos are written by a collective, as in the case of the Cyber Feminist Manifestos. So what I would like to do in the rest of my talk is tell you about what I found interesting and inspiring in those manifestos, focusing on two issues specifically, one that I called cloud identities and the other cyber bodies. Now, some of you may already raise the eyebrow. Identities, bodies, disconnection, mind, body. I'm using it kind of analytically. I think there's a better way to think about it, and I probably have to think more about it. But in no way in those manifestos, there is this kind of distinction made between mind and body or identity and body. They are very much showing how they are interconnected. And it would be quite clear, even though I divided in two parts just to structure somewhat my talk, I think it would be quite clear how this kind of identities and bodies are always connected, and they're only artificially separated from each other. So for cloud identities, the one thing to probably mention at the very beginning is that most of those manifestos are very much embracing postmodern, kind of classical postmodern theories of identity. So they're presenting visions of identity of kind of partial, contradictory, and strategic identities. They're talking about kind of the range, then Legacy Russell in glitch feminism, she's talking about us being a spectrum, and also having multiple selves, multiple versions of ourselves. So as I said, kind of quite postmodern visions of identity. They are quite often also against biological determinism, which I think it's also not a surprise if you think about the root in kind of postmodernist theories. So the idea is that the identity, of course, is not coming from the biology. It doesn't have much to do with the biology. And it's also not the rejections of biology. It's rather using technology for adjusting biology. So here's one example from the Countersexual Manifesto from Paul Preciado, talking about gender hacking through self-grown hormones bought by cryptocurrency on the dark web. So here we can see the digital technology, biotechnologies are imagined something positive. It's something that we can actually help us to become who we actually want to be, to adjust whatever biology gives us to kind of, so we can work with it. So a kind of very positive version of it. And a lot of those, as you can see here already, the identities, discussions about the identities, not surprised because feminist and queer manifestos are about gender specifically. And a lot of them are also imagining kind of abolishing gender in many different ways. Sorry, actually not very much abolishing gender as much as abolishing gender identity, gender binary. And that's an important distinction I'll tell about a little bit more in a second. So here in xenofeminism, for example, they propose that we should strip gender of social ramifications. They compare gender to eye color. So yes, there is a difference. It still should be the difference. We recognize there is a difference, but we don't attach all those social norms and expectations to it. So we can see how they want to abolish the kind of gender binary kind of importance of gender rather than the gender as kind of pretend that we live in a gender blind world. Again, the digital spaces are very often imagined as online space giving freedom to become who you are, become your avatar, as Legacy Russell mentioned in her manifesto. Again, we know those discussions from digital media studies about kind of media, counter-public safe spaces, providing us spaces to be who we want to be. I did some work in my past project with Polish non-binary migrants in the UK and how they were kind of navigating different digital media spaces to kind of navigate and explore and experiment with different gender identities. It's not very naive. They also recognize the limitations of the digital platforms. They recognize that the digital world is currently owned by a couple of mega social media platforms. So they recognize the limitations, but I think in this utopian vision still emphasize the potential of the medium for those kind of discovery and exploration. And another thing I want to mention here is what Donna Haraway was saying, was asking for the solidarity based on affinity, because if you want to actually kind of abolish gender and importance of gender, if you don't connect it with the biological, the question remains what that means to have a feminist movement or any kind of identity-based movement. And she suggests let's not have identity-based movements, but rather affinity movements. Political kinship should be what connects us rather than any kind of sort identity. Now I want to mention and kind of work a little bit more with this kind of idea that the world is not fully genderless. And some of those visions are more optimistic and more utopic. Some of them are still proposing a better future, but a little bit more dystopic and criticizing more of what is right now. And this is the case in that book, Furious, Technological Feminists and Digital Futures. Specifically talking about identity and gender, they're kind of us all the time reminding, come on, there are some gender relations. There are still racialized relations there. Don't forget about those relations. We can still strive for degendering those relations, but we can only be able to do that, recognize how already gender and racialized they are. Now I give you an example that hopefully works. This is one of the kind of utopic idea that was also out there on the internet for a long time, fully automated luxury communism. It was there on the internet for a long time, and recently it was put together by this author, Aaron Bastani, in a form of a book, but it was floating there online for a longer time. So basically, the starting point of this idea is automation is increasing, robots, computers, artificial intelligence, algorithms are doing a lot of tasks that people used to do. And that's kind of the fact. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that this automation does not translate in higher wages for workers, or basically for us having more time for ourselves, let's say for leisure or family time. Because if our work has been automated, it kind of suggests that we have more time for ourselves. This, in this vision, is suggested is not a problem of automation itself, it's the problem of automation under capitalism. Because capitalism is kind of taking the wealth created through the automation and giving it to the few rather than redistributing it more fairly and democratically. That's why they're kind of proposing in fully automated luxury communism, yes, automate work, focus on automation, we'll have a lot of time for ourselves, for our leisure and family time, redistribute the wealth, and we'll have a good life and good world. Then there was a different visions of that, the same idea floating. First on the internet, in terms of memes, in mid-2010s, we have a fully automated luxury gay space communism. Those very popular meme, you can find it on like Know Your Meme websites. And then another author proposed this. Full-on, fully automated, luxury green, disabled, trans, feminist, queer, interspecies, space communism of color. So kind of my question here was, why do you need that? Like, why do you want to add all those things here? And I think that brings us to very classical feminist discussions between recognition and redistribution. So redistributions in this feminist work means basically the material, class, how the goods are being redistributed. It's about reproduction. Recognition is more about identity, but immaterial is about reproduction rather than production. And there was a big discussion of what's important. A lot of feminists were just arguing, we cannot separate them. It's always working together. One has an influence on the other. So some here in those debates were discussing, if we actually have a fully automated luxury communism, nobody cares then if you're gay or straight, if you're woman or man, you know, everybody will have a lot, will live in luxury, nobody will care about it. Some other authors, and here Mark Bold is one of them, were saying, it won't work like that. Those things, those kind of issues of race, sexuality, gender, age, ability will not disappear in the kind of fully automated luxury communism unless we will start working through them from the very beginning. So that's why they are proposing this kind of additions here in a kind of very clearly provocative way to think about, like, you know, let's think about those kind of things, recognition and redistribution together from the very beginning. And let's think about this kind of how this kind of luxury communism that's focused on class, redistribution, and production, how kind of recognition can play out there as well. And then continuing that, I think there's a wonderful critique also, like following that, offered in, again, the book Furious, Technological, Feminist, and Digital Futures. This feminist tells us, you know, okay, so if we imagine that the automation means the end of the work, what does that mean? Does that mean that we have now more leisure and family time? Well, we know that there is also work involved in family time and leisure time. If we want to have a very nice drinks, all of us at the beach, it's quite likely that the people who serve us will be women, migrants, or people of color. So there is, and also in family life as well, traditional households, but women doing this unpaid work. So I think that's also very nice correction to the thinking about the automation of work. In a way, they ask, why do we focus only on automation of kind of paid work and what we consider as work? How about automation of leisure time and family time? Do we have so many discussions about it? The futures of automations are usually discussions of the future of automation of work as we kind of know it, associated with men, paid work, serious work, instead of, for example, taking care of other people and the work in the leisure industries or at home. So I think that's very nicely shows how they bring those issues of, for example, gender to those visions of the future, in that case, automated future, not necessary to say that, you know, we still want this kind of gendered life in the future, the utopic digital future, but rather to say, let's not forget about it, because right now those relations, social relations, are very much structured along that lines. And if we don't work with them, through them from the very beginning, we may end up in this kind of better futures for some and not for the others. And the last time when I talk, very briefly want to mention here, all of those visions of identities here are very much intersectional as well, thinking about different forms of identities. So different aspects of our identities intersecting in a very different ways. What is, I think, quite unique in those manifestos is that they present, they kind of rethink intersectionality as it was originally proposed by Crenshaw. Some people criticize Crenshaw's vision that is a little bit more like a static gridlock model, race and gender intersect, you are that person and that's it. And here I think we have some offers of more postmodern versions of intersectionality. So just before talking about intersectionality as assemblage, so something coming from postmodern theories, Deleuze and Guattari, of assemblage. So rather than being a gridlock as a kind of different intersection of our identities, some of them coming together, being assembled in a specific way, in a specific context and specific situation, but then being disassembled and reassembled in different way, in different cultural context, different situation, and so on. And in the book Furious, they also encourage us to think about intersectionality as clouds. So also clouds without very specific rigid boundaries, clouds that are changing the shape, being fluid, intersectional in their own right, but also intersecting with other clouds and other aspects of our lives. So now I would like to move on to the second part, which is focused on cyborg bodies. And you will see in a second how it's also very much related to identity as well. So the idea of cyborg, of course, has been popularized by Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. when she basically asked us to break up the divisions between animals, humans, and the machines. She says it's not actually that easy to find what's the exact boundary between animal and human and machine. We are already some kind of assemblages of the synthetic and organic at the same time. So that's the kind of starting point here. And I already mentioned kind of again that a lot of those manifestos are against biological determinism. Some of them are also dedicated to anti-naturalism. This is specifically taken from xenofeminism. So here, this does not mean that they are against nature in general, but they're against the fetishizing the nature and kind of privileging the natural over technological. So again, the technological intervention in the natural are very much welcome and should be there. And I think what's quite powerful here is this kind of breaking up this division between the technological and the natural, as they are very often imagined in the mainstream, or historically, I would say. So the technological is kind of imagined as the domain of man, rational science, production again, and the natural is imagined as female, as realm of reproduction, kind of emotions rather than being rational. We can think about the Mother Earth, the imaginations of Mother Nature, and so on. So they're breaking up with that and clearly stating, as Donna Haraway famously stated, I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess. And doesn't mean that she rejects the goddess or the natural, because it's already in the cyborg, right? Cyborg is animal, human, and machine. So it's already the synthetic and organic, the natural. So it's there. But some of those, I think, most of those manifestos focusing on digital technologies, they're taking a stance against what some call ecofeminism. They're really kind of going very much for the nature as kind of natural place for feminist work, because it's associated with the feminine, with the female. So this is, I think, also interesting kind of engagement with technology, not fully rejecting the natural, but also kind of thinking about how we can work with them together. And some of them actually saying, again, as I said before, kind of we very much welcome the technological interventions in the natural and the biological. So they talk about, for example, the tyranny of biology sometimes, thinking about giving birth and reproduction. And they said, like, yes, if we can make it better through technology, let's do that. The one thing that's also very clear in this manifestos is that cyborgs are disobedient bodies. And that's very clear in many of those manifestos when they use the language of glitch, error, failure. And that's kind of positive moments of refusal. So why is it considered as positive? It's because the machine or the technology is basically imagined as a kind of society here. Society that works, that kind of try to straighten us up, tell us what to behave. If you are a woman, you should do this. If you are a man, you should do that. So the glitch and error and failure is a failure to follow the normative expectations and norms. So this is the power and positive aspect of the glitch and refusal, saying, no, I will not do this. I will not follow that. But also they consider it as a very generative force. So there are also some glitches in the machines, also in many different social media platforms, many different digital technologies. Something doesn't work, which is an opening for us to offer something subversive, to do it differently than we are being asked to do. And some examples here, the obvious one is glitch feminist, where a manifesto, when Legacy Russell is working through that notion of glitch and error all the time to think about it positive and not positive, kind of positive and generative force. And the other one is Feminist Data Manifest No. So again, kind of the refusal, saying no to different aspects. Again, saying no sounds a little bit like it's not offering anything new, right? It's like I'm just offering the critique, but they actually combine it with the commitments to do something. So here we see that it refuses harmful data regimes and commits to new data futures. So for example, in the second point, they write, we refuse to be disciplined by data, devices, and practices that seek to shape and normalize racialized, gender, and differently abled bodies in ways that make us available to be tracked, monitored, and surveilled. We commit to taking back control over the ways we behave, live, and engage with data and its technologies. Again, I told you already that the manifestos are very often about the principles, about the doctrine. So sometimes we can actually wonder, what does that actually mean, right? How do we do that? But I think the manifestos are powerful in a way that show us the principles of the future, and then it's for us to kind of discuss it among ourselves. What actually does that mean? Can you give us some examples in your life, how we can envision and commit to that in your kind of technologies that you engage with? So I wouldn't take it as a kind of disappointment. I would take it as an invitation to think about those principles in a kind of lower level and in more practical terms. So the question is also, if we imagine that the society is this one big machine, that we try to be glitches there, we want to refuse how to work, what to do with those machines? And of different technologies, whatever we think about it. It's very, here the issue of technology, machine, sometimes it's very specific social media platform, very specific algorithm, but sometimes it's actually used metaphorically as a kind of the world, the society, how it operates is a kind of machine as well. So Donna Haraway suggests build and destroy machines, identities, categories, relationships, spaces, and stories. So here is the idea of refusal sometimes, again, refuse to use maybe some particular social media platform, but also commit to creating something new and maybe creating a new platform that you would like to see. Another very popular strategy here is to make use of glitches. So repurpose and reappropriate, it's very much a theme that's coming back in many of those manifestos. Specifically, it's articulated as such in xenofeminism. And I would like to give you some example of those two kind of strategies here. Build something new, destroy the old, and build something new. I can think about, for example, AI tools and chatbots specifically. You know, we know like something like ChatGPT, we know how kind of often sexist, racist, and or whatever not those machines are. It is because they're trained on data that are very much biased and prejudice. Where Queer AI project suggests there is a possibility to do it differently. What they did, they created their own corpus. They trained the machine on erotic literature, feminism, queer theory, and an ethics of embodiment. So, you know, now we can chat with that kind of bot and get a little bit different answer than you get from ChatGPT. So this is a kind of one proposition. Another one about another example I want to give you about repurposing and reappropriating is from the soft science poem books from Franny Choi. So what she did in one of her poems, and she got a lot of racist and sexist comments on Twitter. She took those kind of hate speech, she put it on Google Translate, she translated in different languages, another language, then back to English, and she got back garbage. And she created a poem out of it. So that is part of the book, the collection, and it's also part of the, like she's reciting different places. So here, of course, this is not the purpose of Google Translate. The purpose of Google Translate is to give you the most accurate translations, the most grammatically correct ones. She repurposes it to do it exactly the opposite, turn this kind of something recognizable hate speech into this kind of very weird collection of words that becoming a garbage. And through that, she wants to also comment about maybe the nature of the hate speech itself. So now coming to the end of my presentation, I want to focus on two kind of things. What I also mentioned to you before, that quite often the machine is also the society is imagined as a kind of broken machine. And here's specifically the work of Sarah Sharma, a manifesto for the broken machine, when she is asking about, she's saying that first of all, a lot of us, marginalized people, queers, non-white people, women, are being considered as broken machines because we are the glitches. We don't do the work. We don't behave properly. We don't reproduce the system as it's supposed to be reproduced. But also she said, you know, we can also imagine the whole society and the system, how it works, is one big broken machine. As she writes, our contemporary social, political, economic system as an already broken machine, full of the incompatibly queer, race, class, and sex broken down machines. We know from many research how often those new digital technologies are created with only one particular kind of people in mind, how they don't recognize some of our faces, how it doesn't give us space for, you know, expressing our gender the way we actually feel it. So also one call in that to change that is another manifesto for queer universal design. So this is coming from disability studies. Universal design is an idea from disability studies, and it's kind of practical, but in a way also radical idea. The whole premise of the universal design is not that you design it for the few, and then some people, disabled people, showed up, and then you have to make special adjustment, but rather build from the very beginning for all. And in the same kind of spirit, those authors suggest not making room for queerness, but kind of creating systems and technologies that are queer by default. So those are my key kind of inspirations that I took from reading those manifestos. What can we take from that for us as researchers and for us kind of, I want to say early career researchers. I don't know if I'm still early career researcher, maybe early mid-career researchers as well. I think a lot, but I have some propositions as well, some kind of specific propositions. One is to look for the engaged visions. As I showed you, they are out there. People are invested in thinking about digital futures from more just perspectives. They're invested in that work. It's out there, not always in academia. It's also in academia, but not always in academia. So let's look into poems, theater, art, whatever. Second thing is turn your work into a manifesto. So I believe tomorrow, you know, all of us, we all care about, especially kind of in works with marginalized communities, but not only. I think all of us kind of care not to write only and do our research for ourselves, but to connect with larger society. And tomorrow you'll have the workshop about public engagement. You can think about turning your work into some kind of public engagement forms in many different ways. You can write a blog post, you can create a podcast, you can create an exhibition. I would like to add to that a manifesto for the reasons that I explained to you, because they are radical, because they ask from us creativity, and why not at least try to turn your research into manifesto, or think about what kind of manifesto my research could be. In a way, what kind of new, radical, revolutionary vision my research can propose. And related to that is dare to dream utopias. So be ambitious and be radical. And thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Amazing, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. Would you like to come and sit down and we'll do questions? Perfect. So because of the people online, we'll take questions from the room and also over the chat, but questions from the room I might repeat so that people online can hear them. If that works. But first of all, just thank you so much. That was, I thought, amazing. I feel like it's given me so much to think about, right back to like rethinking Marx and the Communist Manifesto to like what happens next and what do we do as individuals and collectively. So yeah, and I'm sure other people feel the same. I wonder if we've got anyone who's got a question to start with. Raz over there.
Thank you very much. I feel very fancy with a live microphone. Appreciate that. Thank you so much, Łukasz. That was amazing. I feel very inspired, but I don't know what I feel inspired for. So I guess it's an invitation to hear more about this relationship between utopia and dystopia. So you called it that dialectic, which then made me think back when I was an undergraduate learning about historical materialism. The dialectic is always leading to something else. So if the dystopia and the utopia are the thesis and the antithesis, or the antithesis and the thesis, and they arrive at the revolutionary point, the point is that you keep revolving, right? There continues to be revolution and change. So I'm interested in the sort of the temporality, kind of the, I guess the function of time in the context of imagining the future. At what point do you arrive at utopia and figure out that that's where you actually are? And when do you stop needing to actually take the change? So that's perhaps a question that I think actually leads out a little bit from what Isabel was saying. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ross. So first of all, I would say that it's quite clear in those works that, as I mentioned, discussing the Munoz vision of utopia, that's not about actually getting there. It's about it's not about reaching utopia, but it's about getting there. So there is also very clear visions of utopia as not being static. So we have to revise also what utopia is all the time. It's not that like, let's sit now, this will be the ideal world and now try to strive for it. So it's also about kind of rethinking what utopia is all the time for us as a kind of repetitive process all the time. But it does kind of, I actually was asking myself the same question when I was reading those manifestos, in a way that in this article by Janoszewski on manifestos, and she was mostly focusing on literary and artistic manifestos, she was saying that some of them are very much time-bound, especially political manifestos, saying we need this now, or we need this like tomorrow, or things very specifically, organizing protests the next month, and they're very much clear time-bound vision for the utopia. Some of the others are, especially artistic manifestos, she was saying, are just kind of with no clear time of reaching there. And she called it like kind of the utopia that's being realized in another world altogether. So in a way, I would say that, again, going back to what I said at the very beginning, that I would subscribe to this vision, that I would be very much worried about kind of coming up with this time-bound utopias. I think it's a kind of, again, getting to it. I think if we have one utopia and we wanted to get it now, I don't think it's an utopia. It's more kind of this practical guidelines, whatever you call it. I think the utopia is this, what the powerful thing about the utopia is that it's this vision of really radical rethinking. So I prefer the utopias that maybe feels unreachable, but that's not a problem, because you are just focusing on how can I go a little bit further in that direction, and then rethinking it all the time what it is. Because our thinking changed, you know, what I would call now utopia, with my imagination, in a more specific terms, wouldn't be probably the same later on. And another thing that I would add, that utopias, I think the powerful thing about utopias is also that they are, especially in these manifestos, often a collective imagination. It's not only what one person imagined, but like what we all together imagine as better future.
Great. I might ask a quick follow-up there while we find any more questions. If people want to put their hands up, we'll come around. We're talking about this idea of a boundless, open utopia far in the future. And I'm thinking about kind of artists and musicians. Janelle Monáe, for example, comes to mind as someone, I don't know if people know her work, her album and book, The Memory Librarian, really expansive version of what the future could be. And sometimes I feel within academia, we struggle to see how we might fit into that, into the future coming to be something completely different. So where do you think the role of the academic is in this process of imagining new futures and moving towards them as well?
Well, that's a good question. I think, like, you know, I wouldn't like make this very clear definition: academic, artist, activist. I consider myself a kind of half activist, half academic. So we have to think about those divisions being kind of that was kind of my point there, also breaking down those divisions, the kind of encouraging to work with people beyond academia as well, because they are thinking about those things, those same issues as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult question because it depends what kind of research you do.
Yeah.
I think I would leave it to everybody to answer for themselves.
Amazing. Other questions? Yeah, here and then.
I have 3 questions. One of them is a bit odd. I'll start with that one. So, do you think the Bible is a manifesto or not? 1. 2, the second one is, what would you want to talk a bit about the difference between research and manifesto, and how much evidence backing does a manifesto need, or does it need any evidence backing at all? And lastly, I'm just thinking that, is it enough for us to have these visions and alternative imaginaries within our queer, non-binary bubbles, or do we not need to include, and how do we do that, people who hold power over us? Because unfortunately, I think that people with power would also be a part of that imaginary future, and hopefully not hold that power over us, but like, how do we sort of like involve them in that work and thought and vision?
Do you think the Bible is manifesto?
I don't know, because I'm not a Christian. I'm just thinking whether
I also don't
it
know.
would, it might be for some people. Doesn't it talk about the future and like with very similar things? I was just like, it has a very similar sound to it, but I don't know how much I would call it a manifesto.
Yeah. Probably wouldn't call it a feminist or queer manifesto, but probably a sort of a manifesto. Yeah, I'm not here to prescribe any definitions what manifesto is, what manifesto is not. Some kind of radical vision for the future, I would call it a manifesto. Probably not, as I said, feminist or queer manifesto, but anything that's kind of creative in offering this kind of rethinking of the future. For me, manifesto is also coming very much from the marginalized position, because you are not happy with the status quo because it doesn't work for you. You could see Queer reads this manifesto. It was published in 1990. It was the high moment of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. So there's this moment of crisis and urgency that, if we don't actually ask and require this new vision, the new world, we'll actually die, in this system. So I think Bible in that sense would, I don't know, maybe for some people could be, but, as it's been used in the history, it's much more imposing those kind of limitations on people rather than kind of making marginalized lives more livable. Then research manifestos and evidence-based. So I don't think we all should just write manifestos, right? I'm not that radical. I'm not saying now, drop whatever you're doing, just think, come together in a collective space and just think the future and write manifestos. But I think, I think like, I always am very, I think it's a danger to think about either or, do this, just that. I think there's space for everything, but I don't think that there is so much space of this kind of imaginings of much more radically different future. And I think that there is a space for that as well for us. So I'm saying not just everyone do manifestos. I think it'd be useful to at least think about it, but let's do some manifestos. Let's consider that as one of the options for us for how we think about our research, but also how we can actually impact other people. So that relates to your third question. Because there are different forms, as I said. It could be a podcast, you can want to impact somebody else. You can write a graphic novel based on what your research was, what you find out in your research. But you can also kind of write a manifesto. You can also write in a very collective way, thinking kind of participatory way together with your participants, if your work includes participants, because some of us just analyze text, or for example. So I would say yes, and then for the evidence backing, Again, I don't think it's like either or. Yes, we need, this is the kind of our business, right? Finding the evidence, but also what is the evidence? This is the kind of question, more bigger kind of questions. Well, I wouldn't like challenge that. I would just say that yes, this evidence is still very much important, but it's about how we present this evidence and what we do with that evidence. So I see in the manifesto space for both, for kind of evidence-based visions, as well as some kind of more creative visions in sci-fi. But our manifestos are not sci-fi manifestos, right? So I would say that there is space for that, but it's more about what we do with it, and kind of we think about what it means, kind of interpretation part of the research as well. What it actually means, what it could potentially mean for kind of better digital future, to quote the name of the network. And the last very small thing, the scale. Yes, I said like we can reach different kind of people. There was discussions in some of the manifestos of scalability. They were thinking more about kind of their own kind of feminist and queer technologies that we create. How scalable are they? When we're thinking about like maybe more traditional technologies, for example, abortion technologies, if they were invented there, who actually have access to it? How many women has actually access to it? And I think we can think about it in terms of the kind of digital technologies as well. If we create new digital technologies that we envisioned, thinking about questions of access, who have access to it is one thing. And then probably the other thing is how to scale it up in a way that is also influence those who create those futures as well, who have most to say about the futures.
Thank you very much, Łukasz. So my name is Jeremy Chen, and I'm a lecturer in law here at the School of Law here. So thanks very much for your presentation. It was fascinating. I felt very inspired as well. So in the very beginning of your presentation, you already mentioned that many of academics will identify as activists as well, but not everyone. Many might have decided not to, maybe for understandable reason. Mm-hmm. Now that reminded me of a debate a few years ago in the legal research community about legal research as activism. And colleagues started to question things like how much, for example, when we advocate a certain policy change, that would be sort of justifiable or not. Now, my question is, and I'm trying to play devil's advocate here, right? So my question is, as researchers, how much do you think we should care about how we present ourselves to the public? And if you think we should care at least to some extent, how would you respond to potential criticisms about sort of the neutrality and independence of our work when we are using manifesto in our work? I know you already said that this would depend on the sort of nature of your research. So maybe I can be a little bit more specific. So in your own work, if somebody like myself is sort of trying to challenge that, then how would you respond? Thank you.
Can I just check quickly that people online are hearing the questions? Yeah. We're all good.
They are just about audible. I think actually if we have any more questions from the audience, it might be better if people can go up to the hour. It'll be a bit clearer.
Come here and join us.
Okay.
Special
Great.
chair that people can.
Yeah, so maybe if people do want to ask questions, if you want to kind of perch over here and then you can come up one at a time and ask them is probably the best thing. I'll pass over to you to answer that question now.
Thank you very much. So first of all, there's no neutral research, and I think nobody has any kind of neutral research. It's about recognizing. So I always would be asking the question back if you ask me like, oh, so are you really neutral? I say, are you neutral? Nobody's neutral. And I think it's our responsibility as researchers to scrutinize our positionality and kind of our biases, and there's nothing wrong with not being neutral and kind of having a clear normative stance in our research. Then if you choose to, then the question, part of the question was about what if you don't want to be activist. Again, I'm not here to prescribe everyone now go on the barricades. It's very individual, and it could be that some people, by doing activism as academic, can actually put their bodies in danger. So it is very individual. I would just encourage people to do that, I would say. And I think one important thing I want to say is that some of us have no choice to not to be activists in a way, because it is about our lives, of our kind of lives of our families of choice, friends. So again, I wouldn't pressure anybody to do that, but recognizing it, that for a lot of academics is actually not a choice, because we are also part of those kind of marginalized communities that we care about, and we want to make their lives and our lives more livable as well.
We've got some questions from online that come here, so hopefully the people online will be able to hear us. And there are a few of them, so maybe we'll do them at different points into disperse. But the first one I've got here is from Lee McDougall. He asks whether the constant striving towards a utopia, and the sort of concrete utopia model, whether there's concern that forever failing to achieve an unachievable goal will lead to some sort of utopia fatigue. People give up and they'll just accept the status quo because it's easier than striving towards a utopia.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, yeah, okay, all of us, we don't like failing. But I think the danger of the utopian kind of failure fatigue, I think it's stronger when we actually expect ourselves to succeed. So here I'm kind of building on some queer work of queer art of failure, that kind of embracing the failure and part of the process. And again, I think there is some kind of normative aspects of focusing on end goals. And the end goals is where we want to reach, and what is the most efficient way of reaching that goal. Those are very clear 5 steps how to get there. I think that's a very simplistic way of creating maybe the utopias, this kind of static utopias, the utopias that actually we don't want. So I believe that if we think about this utopia as something that we reconsider and reconstruct all the time, and we accept that disappointment and failure is part of it, and focus on the process and whatever we are able to challenge, also collectively, because that gives it a lot of power and enjoyment, then I think fatigue could happen, but there's a less chance of getting the fatigue there.
Thank you. I think maybe if you just follow, yes, perch there or there and ask away.
Strange.
Hello, my name is my name is Ari, University of Sociology. I have a grounding question I want to ask. You mentioned in one of your comments the importance of evidence-based manifestos, and I'm curious about the evidence for the need for manifestos. I'm curious in the literature you did for this presentation, if you encounter anything about the impact of manifestos on social change. And Marx Engels comes to mind as the most preeminent example, but I'm not aware of anything that attributes causal significance to the work itself. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So I showed you in this kind of slide with many different kind of feminist and queer manifestos that there could be very different ones. And some of them are very short and provocative, like the Silver Feminist Manifesto, that you finish reading it and you kind of like it, but you kind of don't know what's there. It's like, what they actually want to say? What do they want me to do? But a couple of those manifestos are also actually written by kind of academics and activists. And the books that I showed you, Feminist, is actually a collective, but also some academics are part of that collective. Donna Haraway, it's much more as well kind of evidence. Again, what she was referring to a lot of other theoretical work, so it's engaged with the literature as well, with many references. Glitch feminism and Legacy Russell, she's more in kind of art world. And she was giving a lot of examples of artists who are kind of trying to challenge gender and sexuality through technology, thinking about it. So that was kind of evidence in a way, a different evidence to what we as academics would consider probably evidence, or maybe if we are art historians, not really. So there's, I think, different degrees of basing in of evidence, but definitely not in this kind of very traditional way that you describe your methodology and you say, you know, this is what I did, this is where my information come from. I think there's acknowledgement where you come from, and a lot of, again, references to theoretical work, other works of other people. So I think it's like maybe different way of evidencing it, but it's just very kind of things that are coming to my mind right now. I didn't think about this evidence question very much, to be honest. And the impact on social, yes. So some of them, yes. I mean, Donna Haraway's Cyber Manifesto, I think we can agree, had an enormous impact. Society, which are parts of the society, also in which kind of parts of the world, I would say. I think it's important to mention that I analyzed only the manifestos in English. And some of them were actually translated into other languages as well, like the Feminist Data Manifest No was translated into 3 other languages as well. I'm now maybe like doing a diversion, but I think it's also, I wanted to say that actually I was thinking when I was analyzing it, my mother tongue is Polish, and I couldn't find anything in Polish actually. And I was thinking, why is it so? Is it that maybe manifesto is not a good genre, kind of cultural thing? Or so I think I will still pose the question for myself for the future, if there is some kind of feminist and queer imaginations for better digital futures in Polish, what kind of form do they take? Because I'm sure they are. So it's also kind of interesting to think about kind of cultural position of the manifesto as a genre, and the question who's writing the manifestos and who feels the manifesto is a way through which they can express themselves, and who also maybe feel like I'm not the one to write a manifesto, and why do they feel so? So with the impact, of course, I didn't analyze the exact impact of them. I think some of them have a huge impact, like Donna Haraway's, most in academic maybe, and kind of feminist circles, rather than society in general. Some of them are very limited, and I've never heard of them unless I started actually Googling what queer and feminist manifestos, so I actually still don't know how popular they are. I think there's also different functions of those manifestos. Sometimes they also give hopes to the communities, so they're also for ourselves, creating us some kind of hope, a kind of vision, maybe inspirations for the kind of marginalized communities themselves. And I think that it's, for me, a good enough impact.
We'll come here, and then we'll come back there, and then to Helen, and then back online. And then we have till 1:45, so we have a while for questions, so we should get through most of them.
Thanks, Lucas. It's Alan Shaw here from the Sheffield University. I'm a digital lecturer, a lecturer in digital marketing. So my question goes back to history. History has shown that oppressed, marginalised groups have had to change language, change their language to survive as a community. And we can see this happening today. TikTok, for example, has banned the terms related to LGBT. So users on that platform are required to create another language. My question is that something that you found in your research in the manifestos? And B, is it really utopia for having to do this?
So is it utopia when they have to
change the language to exist in a community?
Yeah. So I think the language question is very important, because we need this new language to kind of be able to imagine differently, but also kind of even think about different relations or social relations differently as well. So even thinking about the grammatical gender in many different languages, and there is kind of innovation in this kind of marginalized communities, right? There's so many innovation in many different languages about how to deal with grammatical gender. how to use they as a plural one, or have to combine different, create new pronouns, or invent new, different new suffixes at the end that maybe can suggest the gender. So sometimes it comes from the necessity because we just want to change how we can express our gender and how gender is conceived. Sometimes, as in your example, it's kind of necessity because we cannot use that language because it's banned. I don't know, I kind of welcome any kind of creativity, wherever it comes from. It is, again, this utopia is a kind of horizon for us to strive for. So I would say, for me, that would be the part of this kind of repurposing and reappropriating, finding glitches. And sometimes you just maybe want to refuse and don't go on TikTok, and sometimes you just want to use it and find this new language and won't be banned and way around it. So I think it's about kind of translating these big visions of utopia. There's the kind of horizons, ideal horizons out there in this kind of everyday practices of what we can change a little bit. What can makes our lives even now a little bit better, right? So for me, I would still welcome that. I could see how it is far from this kind of utopic vision, but it's part of getting there, I would say.
Okay, we'll just come to the back here, if that's. Yeah, if you can come down, that would be perfect.
So thanks for the very fascinating presentation. I'm asking this as somebody who presented a manifesto in my previous work that I call, was more engaged, but what I call deliberative work. So, and to this, a reviewer of the book actually said in their review that the idea of a manifesto was limiting because it did not capture the expanse of the ideas and the experiences of the people that then contributed to the work. So my question is, in the spirit of the more amorphous and the more fluid, how can we think of manifestos? Are they limiting? Do they help us go beyond? But just a provocation on whether they can actually be limiting experience. Yeah.
I think that's actually a great question. I didn't think about it, but you're right that like when you put it out there and you give it a shape, it's kind of suggests that this is the manifesto that this is the future we want to go for, and then we can now think about this kind of more executive-like steps to get there. I think that one remedy for that is explosions of manifestos, as I show there. It's a kind of remedy that it's not only one manifesto that we all agreed on and then now striving for it. So I think more manifestos is kind of then giving us this diversity of different visions, and the different people are also emphasizing different aspects, what's more important for them in their different manifestos. Like I could see in some of the manifestos that I was analyzing, class in some of them was very much there, for some was not very much there. It was all about gender, sexuality, race, but less so about class, and some was like really emphasizing that aspect. So I think this explosion of manifestos is one kind of remedy to that. Second of think, we can also think about this kind of manifesto as a kind of living document as well. Digitally, a lot of things are possible. It's not that we have to print it out, publish in a book, or the manifesto on a poster, put the poster there, and that's it. Even there, you can take the pen and cross something and write over it. And in the same sense, in the digital time, it's maybe possible to create kind of a live manifesto where people can add stuff, add notes and comments, rewrite it. So that's kind of possible way of thinking how maybe we can go beyond the idea of this kind of manifesto as a one static final document, right? Because I think that could be the limiting part. That's a great question. I didn't think about it, so thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. The part you were mentioning about dreaming utopias really speaks to me, and I think that raises a question, especially in relation to, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Pippa, I'm from University of Oxford, in the Geography and Environment Department. So the question is about utopia in relation to a digital and technology world. Digital and technology, one can argue, is very much a global thing. It creates this interdependent global world. But at the same time, dreaming up a utopia, I have a feeling is very subjective, normative, and very much cultural and context dependent, very specific. We would have very different visions of utopia. So how do we then reconcile the scale issue of having these interconnected global digital world and having utopias? Is it realistic to have a global vision of a digital utopia for the world, or will it then be fragmented? And that raises the question of digital interface across countries or across regions. So yeah, maybe thoughts on the scale issue of digital utopia. Thank you.
Thank you. Another great question. And I think it kind of relates to the previous question, because it is, again, about this kind of limiting aspects of utopia, and the utopia as a kind of final product, which is finished, as a kind of finished product. I specifically using these horrible words because I don't want this kind of vision of utopia as being a kind of finished product. So I don't think I have much to add here apart from having more manifestos, having more kind of different kind of manifestos and live documents that are being rewritten and recreated. I think you also very correctly identified this kind of transnational aspect, which is also important in my work. There are culture-specific issues, but I think I always argue that culture is very much transnational, much more than we think so. So there are already connections, and we can also write, I think the best manifestos are kind of the manifestos written collectively, and then we can make those kind of collectives also transnational as well. And again, as much as utopia is not this one end product towards which we strive, I think the discussions about what we want as a utopia is already good enough to think about, even if we have some disagreements, and to think about what we can actually agree on, what are our different perspectives. So I would just say that maybe that's kind of solution to it. Again, I would kind of be avoiding to the vision of having one manifesto for feminist and queer digital futures at the global scale, because that would be this kind of finished end product towards where we strive. But I also wouldn't say that like everybody should just create their own manifestos on their own. This is my vision, and this is what I want as a digital future. But rather kind of this collective aspect of it, is actually discussing it from many different perspectives.
We've got some more online questions. We've got one from Nadine, two from Nadine actually. Firstly, whether the feminist internet imagined in the manifestos is meant to be a new alternative internet space, like a safe space, or whether it's meant to transform the current commercial internet space. And secondly, building on some questions I think here, whether the principles developed in the manifesto should also guide action, e.g. government policies, and whether that was made clear in the manifestos at all, and also as we think about things like standards for platforms. And so she's really interested in the sort of application of the ideas developed in the manifestos.
Mm-hmm.
We have one more actually from Gemma here, which says that whether we have time to exist imagining a utopia given the climate crisis. How do we keep imagining and creating utopias when we keep getting news of only having a few years of a habitable environment?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone, the internet people. The first question was about the feminist internet is something new, or is it kind of repurposing of what already exists, the commercial internet? In the manifesto that I was reading, I think both. Some of them are really imagining new things. Some of them are new versions of things that we already have, like the example of kind of queer AI chatbot. it is a kind of new thing, but it's kind of built on what we already have, kind of chatbot, basically. A lot of them is, as I also mentioned, is kind of repurposing it. So there is some kind of recognition that we live now in the world that is so full of, that's so much digitalized that we cannot avoid it. And we cannot even afford to say no to some digital platforms. So in a way, it was both kind of destroyed and build new platforms, but also try to work, if you have to, try to find those glitches and errors within the system that you already have. So I would say both at the same time. I think both are possible. And we can think about some kind of other big projects. Kind of the biggest, probably non-commercial project, far from ideal, is Wikipedia project, which is one of the probably biggest digital project that is non-for-profit. So we have some people coming together and doing something for free just because they believe in something. The second question was about principles should be translated into very specific actions. I think this is not the place for the manifestos. That's why I was saying in the presentations that it's then up to us, different communities, and also probably people who write the manifestos as well. Okay, so we wrote those principles, we kind of agreed on those principles, and sometimes going back to your question, I think it's maybe easier to agree on these broader principles because the problem very often is about what does actually mean? How do you actually translate it on the ground? And this is, I think, when more problems can come up. So I think this is not the place for the manifestos, but I think it is useful. In a way, I propose this kind of manifestos here as something else to those guidelines, because I think it's quite common in research already asking us, give us some policy recommendations, gives us some guidelines for the platforms. And so I kind of think we already have those. And I thought maybe let's start with these bigger principles and then think about how other people can translate it into specific actions, guidelines. Ideally, policymakers translating those principles themselves, or platforms translating it themselves, because they know the ground the best, how it works, and what's needed, but just kind of giving this kind of guidance and principles from manifesto. So that's why I kind of want to kind of bring forward in this presentation the need for those kind of principles, foundations that radically, revolutionarily reimagine the digital as a better place. And the final one, do we have a time for thinking about it? So I think, again, just because the utopia as this kind of horizon being somewhere out there in another world is very far away, and maybe we don't know even if it happens and when would it even happen. And as I said, in that vision, it's not about actually getting there. It's not about reaching it, but actually getting there. And I think, so I would say those kind of coming with this kind of utopian principles can give us extra energy to change the now and here. And when you think about a lot of all those manifestos, they are coming from this feeling of crisis and urgency. And as I mentioned, the queers read this manifesto. I think in queers read this manifesto specifically, it's not about digital media, but it is about, yes, we need the change, radical change, and we need it now because we are dying. So in a way, it was about the change is we need it right now, the change. And I would kind of suggest that just the proliferation of all those feminist and queer manifestos about digital futures, as I observed, starting in 2010s and forward, suggests that probably in the community there is this feeling of urgency right now as well, that this AI system, datification, is taking over our life very rapidly, to a very big extent, that we feel this urgency to write and reimagine them. So I wouldn't say that, so I think my answer here is that the utopia as a kind of radical reimagination of the present is kind of normally located very far away. But I think because then we have that vision, it's kind of the work that it does is to inspire us to ask and try to go for a more radical change now. Because then we know we at least have some visions of this radical change and we can work towards it now. So I wouldn't say it's contradictory, and I would probably still go back to this kind of concrete ideas, concrete utopia. That's not something coming from the struggle that we're having right now, rather than just thinking about the abstract ideal world just for the sake of it, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you. We have just a few minutes left. I wonder, we have a question down here. And any others from anyone? One there.
One more.
Great. Shall we take all three then? And then, Lucas, you can respond to the final three. So one,
Great.
two, and then one online.
Hi, Łukasz. I'm Chang. I'm from Hong Kong Baptist University and currently a visiting fellow here in the department. So I wanted to hear basically more about like the ways in which glitches and errors could work as mechanism towards like maybe possibility to change or restructure the existing kind of ways that things work, especially in the sector of technology, because I understand the rationale that they oftentimes it opens up like maybe it is through the cracks in the system that people it opens up like possibilities to challenge that, but oftentimes I'm also slightly frustrated to see that those glitches and errors are often seen as exceptional, temporal, and not the norm, and oftentimes it's quickly fixed and then things go back to normal. So it doesn't really lead to restructuring or change. It's just some temporal kind of like release or something like that. So I want to hear more about glitch feminism and how it works to ensure that there is really possibility to restructure and change things.
Great, thank you. And then we'll come. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nika. I'm from Queen Mary University of London, and originally, so I want to say something about Marinetti's futurist manifesto. I know one thing about it. I know it from high school because we had one day we spoke about this manifesto, and they told us that was a very important manifesto for fascism under Mussolini. And I guess what it made me think was that manifestos and utopias for me feel they're often about the future. And I'm wondering, you mentioned something about learning about past struggles and like learning from past struggles, but also it made me think like it's important to think of the importance of manifestos in how they, for example, how the Communist Manifesto was enacted on the ground, because it was taken, as said earlier, like it's like one way of looking at things. And the same thing happened with Marinetti's manifesto, like it was taken by the word or like the and I kind of want to also, I have a question. This is some kind of ideas, like what made me think about the role of the past, but I also wonder how you feel about the issue of using words that are kind of contaminated, let's say, because the word queer as well was a slur. So I guess the same could go with feminism or communism and all this stuff, and it just feels a bit like luxury communism and all this stuff. Like it just kind of, it's like again, like the words that don't feel very inclusive, because there are people who have very different feelings around these words. So I wonder, how do you feel about the past as well as the changing of
Great, thank you. I'm aware that we're already at time. I think we could just carry on forever with all of these questions and discussions. So Lucas, I wonder if you just want to say a few words on those two, and we'll stop there.
Yeah, sure. So the first one was about glitches and how that works, and yeah, okay. So that's true. So you were saying that glitches sometimes maybe it's not a big change because the glitch happens and then it's being fixed very quickly. I think in those propositions about glitch error and kind of glitch error and failure, there was a lot of kind of, yes, let's take that moment and use it as much as we can. And there was, I think, understanding that those glitches actually happen quite often, even though they may be very quickly fixed. There'll be another glitch that we can build on. So, because very often those technologies have a lot of glitches. I would add for myself as well that there are glitches and glitches. Some glitches makes our life very difficult, right? Some systems don't recognize us. Maybe some digital bio-recognition on the borders make, because of the glitches, will actually make not allow us to go to be in that particular country. So I think it is important to think about different kind of glitches, and some of the glitches may be, the glitches in the system that works potentially to our advantage. And I think this is what the glitch feminist is asking from us, think about how we can actually use those glitches to our advantage. But of course, there are some other glitches that we should probably oppose, because there are glitches that makes our lives more difficult and actually offer more discriminatory place rather than not. But there is this kind of, another thing I could say here is that hacking is also proposed by a lot of those, in a lot of those manifestos. So apart from looking for glitches, you can also make them not work. You can try to hack them in many different ways, repurpose, but also hack them. So there's also kind of, in the spirit of hacktivism, kind of hacking for good. So you can also kind of, there's another way to deal with this kind of small glitches, to actually create more of them and create bigger glitches. Now the questions about the reappropriation of manifestos. We don't have much control about who is taking our words and what they do with them, I would say that. We can influence that, we can explain that, but I see how in Polish debate, this anti-gender ideology discussions are using all the time Judith Butler gender trouble, misquoting her horribly, trying to show, you see, she says that everybody can change the sex every day. And then I was thinking, so is that the fault of Judith Butler? It's not. Like, if they always find something in your writing that they misappropriate if they want to. And so my strategy was rather ignore that, to be honest, personally, with my own work. Like, I try to write the best I want to write, to think that I believe in, and the most authentic way I feel like I want to write in a way, the most authentic way for myself, rather than strategically thinking, will that maybe cause some trouble here? Maybe will these people reinterpreted it and reappropriated it against my people? Because I think it will always can happen and probably will happen. So that's my kind of answer also to kind of the second question. If it's always useful to reflect on the terms you use, but if you believe in those words and you kind of are able to explain why you are using this word and the other, again, I'll just use it and go for it rather than being apologetic. I think your question was a little bit different because it was also about inclusivity, not only being apologetic and saying, no, I used that because I don't want to offend some other people. Like in the cyber feminist manifesto, I don't know if you could see, but there was the word cunt very often used, saying we are cunts, we are the cyber cunts. A lot of people could feel offended. I wouldn't kind of worry about that, because this is part of the deal with manifestos. They're radical, they're revolutionary, and they're kind of reappropriating those words for themselves. But I think the question about inclusivity is a different one. Still, I would just say, reflect on the words that you use, be able to kind of explain why you use those words and the others, but don't be too apologetic about it, and don't think too strategically about it, because they could always be misinterpreted, but also reappropriated by people who are against us.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone as well for all the amazing questions. Thank you everyone online for questions too. Rosalind?
Yeah, thanks Isabel. First of all, thanks Isabel for amazing sharing.
Oh, you're welcome.
Amazing. And also to Łukasz, just as ever. When Łukasz first joined the university, it was with me. We were lecturers in the basement of our old building together. And I'm reminded of fun times talking together. We've revolutionarily overrun by 6 minutes, and there is some very super good timekeeping going on here, and I've screwed it all up already. That's cut into our PhD students' times to refresh themselves before the Petra Kucha begins in earnest in 20 minutes. So they need to wet their whistles before all of that kicks off. So I'd just like to say thank you to both of you, especially you, Łukasz. It was an amazing talk, and a round of applause, I think. So refreshments are outside, is that right, Ruth? Yeah, you should see them. I think they're just over there.